The apartment. Everyone heard screams from, but no one lived there, the sound that wouldn't stop. It started on a humid night in August 2014 in a small Chicago suburb called Edgewater Hills, a place known for its calm streets and perfect lawns. But that night, police dispatchers received 3 separate 911 calls from tenants of Mapleview Apartments, all reporting the same thing: screams. Not just a single cry or shout, but long guttural screams echoing through the building's empty 5th floor. When Officer Daniel Griggs arrived with his partner, the halls were silent. The air was heavy, the lights flickered, and the faint smell of cleaning chemicals hung in the corridor. Apartment 5B was the unit neighbors said the sounds came from, but the property manager swore the apartment had been vacant for nearly a year. The door was locked. No lights inside, no furniture visible through the blinds. But then came something that froze both officers in place. A faint noise, like the dragging of something heavy across the floor. Griggs called for backup. They broke the lock and entered. The apartment was empty. Mostly. The walls were stripped, the kitchen bare, the air stale. No furniture, no carpet, no people. But in the middle of the living room floor was a large dark stain, faintly visible even in the dim flashlight beam. A chair stood near the corner, metal, rusted, its legs uneven. It looked out of place, like it had been left there intentionally. In the corner of the room, an old cassette recorder sat beside a cracked window. When one of the officers pressed play, the sound that filled the room sent chills through everyone there. The tape captured a recording of the very screams residents had reported. Human, terrified, and real. But the recording abruptly cut off with a static crackle and the sound of a door slamming. The forensics team arrived within the arson. They tested the stain. It wasn't paint. It wasn't rust. It was old blood, at least 5 years old, according to initial reports. Detective Lena Ortiz was assigned to the case. Her first step was to trace the history of the apartment. The last recorded tenant was a woman named Tara Evans, who'd lived there until 2009, when she suddenly vanished. Her rent had been paid up for months after her disappearance, in cash. And when police first investigated, they found no sign of struggle, no sign of forced entry, and no trace of Tara. The case was eventually closed as a missing person. But now, 5 years later, her name resurfaced. Ortiz had a hunch. The cassette recorder wasn't random. Someone had placed it there recently. She sent it to audio forensics for analysis. What they found made no sense. The tape was old, decades old, but the recorder had new fingerprints on it. The prints matched no one in the system. Neighbors began reporting strange noises again that same week. Not just screams now, but footsteps in the hallway late at night, the creak of a door opening, and a woman's voice whispering from inside 5B. But every time police arrived, the unit was locked and empty. Ortiz decided to spend the night inside the building. She sat in her car across the street, watching the flickering window of apartment 5B. Around 2:17 a.m., her body camera picked up something faint, a shadow moving across the 5th floor window, the outline of a person. She ran inside, radioing for backup. The door was still locked when she reached it, and when she opened it, the air inside felt colder, almost unnatural. On the table where the cassette had been, there was now a single sheet of paper, creased and yellowed. Written on it in pencil were just 6 words. "You're listening to the wrong tape." Ortiz froze. Because that tape, the one still in evidence, wasn't the only audio sounds found in the building. In a crawlspace behind the bathroom wall, her team uncovered a hidden box containing 7 more cassette tapes, each labeled with a different year, 2004 through 2010. And one of them was marked Tara, last recording. When they played it back at the station, what they heard was worse than anything they'd imagined. But the real shock came when the forensics lab revealed where that recording was made. It wasn't in the apartment. It was recorded inside the Mapleview building's maintenance office, 3 floors below. And the man who worked there, the one responsible for managing the building all those years, had disappeared too. The building's secret history. Detective Lena Ortiz couldn't shake the sound of that last recording. Every time she replayed it, something new crept out of the background. A faint clinking noise, a man's voice murmuring words too distorted to make out, and a rhythmic sound that almost resembled typing. It wasn't random. It was calculated. Whoever made those tapes wanted someone to find them. But the strangest part? The timestamps on each cassette didn't match the years they were labeled with. Every one of them seemed out of sequence, as if whoever recorded them was deliberately distorting the timeline. Ortiz pulled the old tenant logs for Mapleview Apartments. Between 2004 and 2010, several tenants from the 5th floor, all living in units surrounding 5B, had filed noise complaints. Not just about screams or arguing, but about recordings. Sounds that seemed to play through the walls late at night, always at the same time, around 2:15 a.m. The property owner at the time, a man named Charles Dempsey, claimed the noises were from faulty wiring, a maintenance issue. But Dempsey hadn't been seen in over 8 years. The building had since changed ownership twice, and each new landlord inherited the same problem. Complaints about apartment 5B. Ortiz's partner, Detective Eric Griggs, dug through archived case files and found something the original investigators had missed. In 2009, just before Tara Evans disappeared, a service request had been filed to replace a utility panel in her apartment, signed by Dempsey himself. But the work was never completed, and no one could confirm if he ever entered the unit. That's when Ortiz decided to have the maintenance closet behind 5B inspected. When the crew opened the wall panel, they found an old audio surveillance setup wired into the building's electrical system. Reel-to-reel tape machines, microphones, even an outdated power supply that hadn't been touched in years. Dust and cobwebs covered everything, but the wiring led directly to apartment 5B. Someone was recording their tenants, Ortiz muttered, staring at the mess of cables. The city electrician confirmed it. The system had been active at least until 2010. Someone had built a network that allowed audio to be recorded from multiple rooms in the building. The question was, why? Later that night, Ortiz sat in her car, staring at the flickering lights in the apartment windows. She knew she needed to find Dempsey, but he wasn't anywhere in the system. No driver's license, no forwarding address, no tax records. It was as if he'd vanished in 2010, the same year the last tape was labeled. When she pulled his original employment file from the city's housing records, she found something bizarre. The emergency contact listed wasn't a family member. It was an entity. The Mapleview Project, Research Division. The problem? No such organization existed in the city's database. Ortiz and Griggs began digging deeper. They tracked down a former maintenance worker named Eddie Markson, who had worked briefly under Dempsey before quitting. Eddie was nervous when they found him. He refused to speak at first, but after some persuasion, he agreed to meet in person. They met at a diner outside the city. Eddie's hands trembled as he stirred his coffee. Dempsey was weird, he said quietly. Always stayed late, said he was collecting data. I thought he meant repair logs or inspection notes. But one night, I saw him with boxes of tapes, hundreds of them, all labeled by apartment numbers. He said he was testing something that could capture emotions through sound. Ortiz exchanged a look with Griggs. You mean like surveillance? Eddie shook his head. Not just that. He said the walls could hold memories. He was trying to recode the past. It sounded impossible, even delusional. But the more Ortiz looked at the evidence, the more it fit. The wiring in the building wasn't just audio surveillance, want to pick up low-frequency sounds from within the walls themselves. Eddie leaned in, lowering his voice. There's something else. Dempsey used to stay in apartment 5B after hours. He said it was the only place the recordings played back correctly. But I swear to you, detective, That apartment was never rented to anyone after Tara disappeared. Not officially, anyway. Ortiz asked him one final question: why he quit. Eddie hesitated, then looked her dead in the eye. Because one night, I heard my own voice on one of those tapes. I'd never been recorded. I was alone in the building, but it was me, talking to someone who wasn't there. He slid a crumpled napkin across the table. Written on it was an address, an old storage unit registered under Dempsey's name. Ortiz felt the air tighten around her. "What's in there?" she asked. Eddie's answer came with a tremor. "If you're lucky, just tapes. If you're not, maybe the reason people keep hearing screams." By sunrise, Ortiz and Griggs were standing outside the rusted roll-up door of Storage Unit 87, the dawn light cutting through the fog. The lock was old, rusted shut. As the bolt cutter snapped the chain, Ortiz whispered, "Let's find out what Dempsey was really recording." The door creaked open, and the air that came out was cold, like the room hadn't seen warmth in years. Inside were shelves stacked from floor to ceiling, filled with tapes labeled by address, date, and apartment number. And in the center, sitting on a chair under a single hanging bulb, was something that made Ortiz's stomach twist. A cassette recorder still running. The counter ticked steadily upward, recording something, even now, the sound that shouldn't exist. The tape recorder in the center of the storage unit clicked and whirred, its reel spinning slowly, as if something invisible was still feeding it sound. Detective Ortiz and Griggs stood motionless, their flashlights cutting through the dust and cold air. The unit smelled of metal and mold, and beneath that, a faint, chemical sharpness, like old film stock. Ortiz stepped forward carefully. She pressed stop on the recorder. The tape ended with a low hiss, followed by silence. Then, when she rewound it and pressed play, a voice crackled through, faint, warped by static, but unmistakably human. "Apartment 5B, phase complete, emotional trace captured." Ortiz froze. The voice was male, flat, emotionless, and followed by faint background noise. Typing, a chair moving, then the sound of breathing. Griggs' flashlight beam swept across the shelves. There were hundreds of tapes here, each labeled by building, floor, and date. Mapleview wasn't the only one. There were at least a dozen other addresses, all apartment complexes across the city, and the years went back decades. "This isn't just one building," Griggs muttered. He was monitoring multiple sites. Ortiz took out her phone and began snapping photos of the shelves. But as she moved her light, something on the back wall caught her eye. A large blueprint pinned with old yellow tape. It was the floor plan for Mapleview Apartments, but drawn over it in red marker was a web of lines connecting rooms, hallways, and ducts, all converging at one point. Apartment 5B. There was handwriting in the corner. Primary node. Optimal resonance achieved. Before Ortiz could process what that meant, her radio crackled. Static. Then a faint voice from dispatch. "Detective Ortiz, units report sound disturbance again. Mapleview Apartments, 5th floor." She and Griggs locked eyes. The sound had synced and arted again. They raced out of the storage unit, the air outside thick with early morning fog. By the time they reached Mapleview, the building was alive. Tenants gathered outside, frightened, some in pajamas. They all said the same thing. The screams had returned, louder than ever. Ortiz led the team up the stairs. The elevator was dead. As they reached the 5th floor, the sound hit. Faint at first, then rising in waves. It wasn't quite a scream. Not anymore. It was distorted, metallic, like human voices recorded and replayed through a damaged speaker. The hallway lights flickered. Apartment 5B's door stood slightly open. Inside, the air was freezing. The walls, once bare, were now covered in tape fragments. Magnetic strips unspooled and stuck like vines, fluttering with every draft. In the center of the room, The same metal chair stood facing the window, but this time, a recorder sat on it, its red light blinking steadily. It was new. Too new. Someone had been here recently. Griggs picked it up. "We'll check the fingerprints," he said quietly. Ortiz nodded, scanning the walls. "No," she whispered. "Whoever did this didn't leave prints." She was right. When forensics processed the device later, they found none. But they did find something else. The internal chip had been replaced, and the file saved inside wasn't just audio. It contained metadata, coordinates. They pointed to a location outside the city, a cluster of abandoned buildings once used by a private research group in the 1990s. The group's name? The Mapleview Project. Ortiz and Griggs drove out the next morning. The road ended in a forgotten industrial park surrounded by tall grass and decaying fences. The main building's sign had long since fallen, but faint letters could still be read beneath the rust. Mapleview Acoustic Analysis Facility. Inside, the walls were lined with soundproofing, foam and old computers covered in dust. In the center of the main lab stood a massive recording console. Reel-to-reel machines, oscilloscopes, and wires snaking into the walls. A faded logbook sat open on the table. Ortiz brushed off the dust and began reading. Each entry detailed experiments with sound frequency capture, conducted on residential buildings to test emotional echo retention. The goal, according to the notes, was to prove that extreme human emotion could leave a measurable trace in walls, furniture, even air. The final entry, dated July 17, 2009, was signed by Charles Dempsey. "Apartment 5B is the only successful site. Do not shut it down. The resonance is stronger each year." Ortiz's stomach tightened. She closed the book and looked at Griggs. He was testing it. On people. Suddenly, from the far side of the lab, a small light blinked to life. A dusty monitor flickered on, displaying a live camera feed. It was Mapleview's 5th floor. The hallway outside 5B. And standing there, perfectly still, was a man in a gray maintenance uniform. Dempsey. At least it looked like him. Older now, face gaunt but unmistakable. He turned toward the camera. Then, without speaking, he lifted something small into view. A cassette tape. He held it up to the lens, then set it gently on the floor before walking out of frame. The monitor went dark. Ortiz and Griggs rushed back to the car, driving straight to Mapleview. When they arrived, the 5th floor was silent again. The door to 5B was closed. A small evidence bag now lay taped to it, with a single tape inside. The label read, "Final recording. For the detective." Back at the station, Ortiz loaded it into the player. Static filled the room. Then came Dempsey's voice, quiet, deliberate. "You don't understand what we built. It's not the people who haunt this place. It's the sound itself. You can't erase what's been recorded." The tape ended abruptly. The case was officially closed 2 months later, the building condemned and sealed by the city. But to this day, residents swear they can still hear faint sounds on quiet nights, voices echoing through the walls of an empty 5th floor, repeating the same phrase over and over again. You can't erase what's been recorded. And the truth is, maybe they're right. Because when the demolition crew finally tore down Mapleview Apartments in 2016, one thing was found still running amid the debris. A small recorder, red light blinking. The counter read, RX 01-1408, still recording. If you thought this story was chilling, the next one will make you question every sound you've ever heard. Hit subscribe, and don't miss what's coming next.